Hello, everyone, and welcome to Delightful Dissent. It's episode 82, and today we're going to be talking to Solène Anglaret, who is a storyteller, entrepreneur, and artist. So, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everyone.
And today we're going to be talking about the idea of negative emotions and that we should always be pursuing happiness and all of this kind of we should be kind of steering away from negative emotions. And I've really seen people go to some huge lengths to avoid feeling things they don't want to feel. And plus, as someone who experiences emotions quite intensely, I know it can be hard to manage, but I also think they're really telling us important things about the world, and avoiding them isn't necessarily a good thing. So yeah, I think it's a really, really interesting thing to be getting into. Now, for anyone who happens to be new to the show, Delightful Dissent is a shared exploration of something that people kind of tend to take for granted and don't really examine as much. So I hope the show gives you some ideas that can help you in your personal and professional life, but perhaps more importantly, I hope it can give you some ideas about you can go out there and challenge some of these assumptions yourself, because I think this is something everyone should be doing all the time. And it's delightful dissent because we're not just arguing with the received wisdom. We're exploring all the possibilities and having some fun whilst we do it, hopefully. The show is genuinely live, so please do bear with us if there are any technical difficulties. Or also, I have a cold today, so if there are any other difficulties as well, and please do be aware that there may be strong language if that's an issue for you, and we may also be talking about some difficult personal topics. In this particular area, we might well be talking about things concerning neurodiversity, mental health, trauma, and perhaps self-harm as well. So if any of those are an issue for you, then please do just be warned and take whatever steps you need to handle that. There aren't any perfect answers here. This is absolutely about exploring and asking questions. If you're watching live, then please do ask questions in the chat, and we'll try and bring them into the conversation as we go. If you're if you're watching the recording, then we'll be sharing information about how you can get in touch with us and carry on this conversation at the end of the show. So yeah, Solène, we first met at a conference where you were speaking, and which I really enjoyed, and particularly how clearly and openly you shared your experiences, and in a way that I was both kind of relatable and practically useful, which is quite a difficult thing to do. So I really wanted to get you, on the show, and have been trying for a little while now. So I'm really pleased that you can join us. But could you introduce yourself a bit, share a bit more about what you do?
Absolutely. Yes, we did. We met in Brighton. It was a really, really amazing conference. Hi, everybody. My name is Solène. I am a bit of everything. I am originally from France. I was born and raised there. I left when I was 18, and the last kind of 14 years, I've lived in 7 different countries, and currently I'm based in Dubai. I moved here a couple of months ago, so it's very new. I have worked for the past 12 plus years, starting in the environmental sector, then travel industry, then moved into diversity and inclusion in innovation. I'm fascinated by everything to do with people, to do with, we talked earlier about psychology and really just understanding humans and understanding the world that we live in. My mission is to bring people closer together around the world, and to talk about things that we don't usually talk about. So I'm really happy to be here to do just that. And maybe just to give a final bit of context, I have my own experiences of neurodiversity and long-term mental health. I was diagnosed a few years ago, first with borderline personality disorder and then with ADHD. And this has obviously informed my life, my whole life, as well as my relationship to this topic that we're going to be talking about.
Super, thank you very much. And before we get too stuck into the topic, because I'm really raring to go on this, but do you have a quote or something that you'd like to share with us before we begin?
Absolutely. And before I do that, I just realized I forgot to share a couple of things about me. One, my pronouns are she, her. And 2, my visual description, if you're not seeing me at the moment. So I'm a white woman in her mid-30s. I have long, wavy, light brown hair. I'm wearing a black and white dress and very bright pink lipstick today. So that's it for my little intro. And yes, I did bring something to share. I know it was meant to be a quote, but in the spirit of oversharing, I thought I brought an entire poem to the table, and it is linked to the topic that we're going to be discussing around negative emotions. So it's called The Guest House by Rumi, and if you feel comfortable to do so, I would invite you to close your eyes to really take it in, because I think that's when you make the most of the experience of those words and seeing and noticing how they resonate. So, The Guest House by Rumi. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house, empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He, she, they may be clearing out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing. Invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond.
Yeah, thank you. It's actually one of my favorite poems. So, yeah, it's really lovely.
I came across it in therapy, actually.
Really?
So it was in dialectic behavioral therapy, DBT, which I took part in the 9 months program. It's the therapy most commonly used to help people with BPD, and it was really instrumental in my recovery journey. And yes, we were talking about emotions and emotion regulation, so very linked to this topic of today. And the therapist invited us for a moment of mindfulness at the beginning of the session, close our eyes, breathing, and read this poem. And literally, that moment was a penny drop for me. It was like, whoa, invite your emotions. Even the ones that I used to label as negative, stay away, don't ever talk about it. That's huge.
It really is. I think it's such a big thing, and it's such a radical reframing of how to be in the world and how to relate in the world. I think I came to Rumi through getting. I've always been obsessed with really interested in various mystical traditions, and when I was going on a bit of a dive into Sufism in general, I came across Rumi and kind of understood like a bit about the history and the context. It's such a powerful idea, though, and it was completely radical for me as well as an approach. I think it's really lovely, particularly when we've to some degree been taught or learnt not to treat that our emotions can't be trusted in some way. For me, I think for me, my own neurodivergence means, that sometimes the reactions have been too strong, according to others, or inappropriate, in that I've reacted to things that apparently you shouldn't find have that level of emotion associated with them one way or another, or have that, even the valence of emotion, the direction of emotion. And I think the idea of just welcoming things in rather than holding on to them, trying to squash them down, is a very, very different approach to the one that I was implicitly taught.
You touched on so many interesting points, and indeed the conditioning around here is the giant rug under which you put all the perceived negative emotions that you don't talk about, versus be positive, be happy, show up, smile, be polite all the time. Everything outwardly is perfect. And again, it's created that dissonance between how we feel and how we show up. And that can then, lead to explosions or implosions because of there's just such a difference. We're just meant to be showing up all happy, but inside we feel the full range. Yes, sometimes we do genuinely feel super happy. Sometimes we don't. And that's the full range of how we feel inside. But yeah, there's that feeling and then that behaving. and expressing, which is slightly different. And the other thing you touched on was intensity and nature. So sometimes, yeah, we get that feedback, right? To say, in this situation, you're angry, but you should be judgment, watching out. You should be sad, anxious, happy, whatever it is. Or in that situation, yes, you're angry. That makes sense. But you should be, again, watch out, judgment, less angry, because you're angry at 100, and this grants a 20 out of 100 response, whatever it is. So again, understanding that duality between nature and intensity, I think, is really helpful as well, because that's where we can start to validate ourselves. Say, this is what happened. This is the emotion that I'm feeling. This is how intense it feels for me. Do I consider that this is valid and justified? But like you said, that again is really hard, because we've doubted ourselves so much and we've hidden so much under the giant rug that we come to a point where we don't know anymore. Is this valid? Am I overreacting? And we look at other people, we ask other people all the time, am I overreacting? Is this just me?
Yeah, and I think, I love that metaphor about, sweeping it under the rug. The difficulty is that sometimes those things come out, and you can overreact, because there is, a past memory coming back, and a past thing coming back, and it just triggering that relationship, and that, some of the past emotion that we've yet to be able to experience and process flows out through the current event. Yet that's not always the case. And I think being able to tell what's from our current experience versus what's this kind of historic stuff that we just haven't had the chance to work through yet for whatever reason is really, really, and it can be really difficult. And I've had people suggest that the reason that I was finding something so difficult was because it was related to historical things, when it absolutely wasn't. Is that I was just finding whatever they were doing really problematic. And so it can be a form of invalidating our experience as well, but it can also be true. And so it's a really, really difficult thing to be with.
It's so complex. And it can be an accumulation of things as well, where seemingly small events can accumulate, and then we talk about the drop, right? The last drop that made everything. So you can have that level of stress that, for example, builds up and up and up, and then it explodes, or the level of the rug is full and full and full, and then it kind of seeps through cracks or holes into the rug. That's how I kind of picture it. And when you're not inviting the emotions in, that's what often happens, is that there is that accumulation. But yeah, what is linked to the past, what is linked to now? Even some emotions bring us into the future, like anxiety. What is linked to envisioning a future of what might go wrong, that then makes us feel really a really intense emotional reaction in the present. So it is so complex, and it is so dynamic. It's constantly changing. And especially in my case, and many people who have the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, you have that really hypersensitivity, that big emotion shift and expression. And it's just really difficult to comprehend and to untangle. I used to talk about, I have a spaghetti bowl of emotion. It's like, oh, I don't know anymore. Sometimes I don't know how I feel anymore, because there's just too many at once. And it's like taking that opportunity again to listen to Rumi's poem and take one spaghetti at a time and think, okay, what is the primary emotion? What is the secondary emotion? I used to, for example, and this is an example that might resonate with some people, I used to display anger, a lot of anger outwardly. Because anger was the lid on top of a pot of sadness. I was so sad. I was so extremely distraught by the state of the world. I am to this day. I mean, obviously, with everything going on, I was so sad. But sadness was taught to me is a weakness. It's negative. It shows that, you can't cope and you're not resilient and all these things. So I put a very, very sealed lid of anger on top of it. And so every time I felt sad, I didn't express sadness. I got pissed off. And again, it's like that's become the outlet. Instead of living it, it was just like throwing it out there.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point because when the emotion doesn't really go away until we've experienced it. It's there to give us a message. I really strongly believe there's a term from psychology about affect as information. There's affect in the psychology sense of feeling, like emotional feeling, and this idea that all of our emotions tell us something important about the world, and that their role is to kind of inform, frame whatever it is that we're doing. And so if we can't really experience them, we can't respond appropriately. It's actually always really hard, and so many of us are taught to kind of redirect emotions. I know this is a very common. I think the sadness into anger thing is also is very common experience, particularly for men. Actually, I think it's socialized as anything other than anger is about the only negative emotion a lot of men are allowed to express, and it's a real trap because it also prevents us from keeping safe. Our one other way I think to understand what we so often think of as negative emotions is as aversive emotions, as things that tell us we need to reduce something or avoid something. And so if we don't get the opportunity to do that, it means that we can be put at real risk for a variety of reasons. And I'm sure that a lot of the difficulties I've experienced have actually been down to the fact that if I'd been allowed to feel the emotion fully, it would have told me that it wasn't a good situation and I should get out of it rather than carrying on.
Yeah, no, we're also in an environment, a society where we are, how to say this, encouraged to distract ourselves. Oh, this is uncomfortable. Distract yourself, watch TikTok videos until the cows come home. Yes, when actually, like you said, listening to emotions and inviting them and reflecting on the message that they carry can provide us with so many answers and ways to move forward that are more aligned with our goals and our values than if we just ignore them. It can protect us when harm is being caused or when we're witnessing harm. It can invite us, encourage us to take action, or like you say, to refrain from taking action. And it's interesting when you read up on emotions. I mean, obviously, there are nuances and it's much more complex than that, but just to maybe give a snippet of a few examples, because sometimes people are like, oh, this is very theoretical. For example, let's take anger. The key message of anger is something is going against your values. So you're having a reaction because you're defending or standing up to your values or to your perception of something being unfair, unjust, whether you're experiencing it or someone else is experiencing it. Sadness is very, very often associated with grief. So we may be grieving for someone, and actually it's broader than that. We may be grieving for something, the loss of a job, breaking an object that is very dear to our hearts. So it could be, a variety of different things, but generally speaking, it's an invitation to slow down and to really let the tears, really wash away, liberate us in some way of that grief. But it can take months and it can come back. And that's the thing. Emotions are they're emotions. I read this recently, energy in motion. I thought this is so beautiful. So it's this energy that is moving through us. And then if we take anxiety, so there's a difference between fear and anxiety, for example. Fear is the tiger is right there, screaming and about to eat us. That's fear. We need to react. We need to do something. It's happening immediately in the present. Anxiety is about the future. It's worrying about what might happen. So that all these things, I'll finish on this because otherwise I'll be talking about every single emotion and then you'll be like all going to sleep. But something that was so useful for me was understanding, for example, the difference between jealousy and envy. I was like, well, same difference. Or guilt and shame. So jealousy is like I have something or someone in my life that I'm worried that someone is going to take from me. And I'm jealous of the risk of losing that person is making me jealous. Envy is I want something that somebody else has. And envy is very interesting as a message because everyone's like, oh, you shouldn't be envious. Blah, blah. Why are we saying that? Why are we judging ourselves for being envious? Actually, envy can be a propeller. It's an invitation to say, hey, someone has something you really, really want. Maybe you can put a plan in motion to, go and get that thing or go and do that thing. I don't know. This person is traveling everywhere. I want to do that. That's a sign. That's an invitation to go and do that if you have the opportunity to.
And absolutely. And it also might be an injustice that someone else has something that you don't. It might be that someone has access to something that you very much need and that you're denied. But I think you raise a really interesting point around this, this experience of how emotions can apply to us and in our own experiencing of the world, as well as kind of to the external world. And one of the things, certainly for me, around adult diagnosis, and came up for me and comes up for a lot of people I speak with adult diagnosis, is that on one level it's very liberating news and it's really helpful, but on another level there's grief about the imagined future that we have for ourselves. So you can grieve kind of potential future identities that you might have had that you lose. In fact, maybe that's always what grief is actually, but it's always kind of on some level about how you're experiencing the world and what that means you can be and who you are, perhaps in relation to others, but always kind of in some relationship to you. But I think that idea, that and guilt and shame, that one is the externalized version of the other, and that they work in different directions. It's really helpful to have that understanding and that kind of working understanding. What is this telling me about the situation? So what can I do usefully about it, rather than letting it be, like thinking of it as just, I shouldn't feel this, or it's like being able to approach it as something telling you something useful, and maybe not complete. This is the other side of it, I think, because you can go too far into just being in emotions. And if you have quite fast, dynamic, high intensity emotions that I do too, as it's also quite common in people with autism and ADHD. So it's it's something I think to some degree we share in terms of experience. Is you don't want to be completely, if I was just living in emotion, I would be all over the place. But that doesn't mean that they're not really useful and they inform a lot of stuff.
That's really interesting. That touches on a very important topic, again, that we learn about in DBT, dialectic behavior therapy, which is your emotional mind and your rational mind. And they cross over kind of like those two circles. And in the middle, you have your wise mind. And from a place of wise mind is when you're able to feel and think, then do. Whereas if you're in purely emotional mind, you feel and do. And if you're purely in rational mind, you're thinking and doing. And I used to personally be pre-recovery journey started. I used to either be in complete emotional mind or complete rational mind. I found it really hard to merge the two. So that's just interesting. And a couple of things that you also touched on that I think are really important points. One is the first point around that diagnosis experience, late diagnosis, and having that dual reaction of the grief with the gratitude. And I think there's a common misconception, which is, well, you can either feel happy or sad. But actually, that's not reality. Sometimes we feel seemingly contradicting emotions at the same time. And I will frequently say to friends, family members, my partner, like, I'm happy sad. Right now, I'm happy sad. Or I'm grieving and grateful. Because you can, depending on what's going on in your life, have that kind of experience where it's like, well, I'm happy about this, but I'm really sad about that. I'm relieved that I got diagnosed finally, but I'm really sad that I'm not going to have that future that I had pictured, or I'm not I didn't get this early,
Yeah,
and maybe
and I'm angry that it was missed for so long, and I'm
yes, yeah,
yeah.
that's it. And then the final thing you touched on, I just want to echo is that should word. So as soon as we say, I should not feel this, I should feel that, I should do this, or if only I had the diagnosis, or blah blah blah, or why not earlier, or da, da. All of these words, all of these moments, they're judgments. We're judging ourselves, we're judging our emotions, we're judging what happened. And what that does is it adds shame to whatever emotion that we're already feeling. So it adds shame to the anger, it adds shame. We feel that, shame, because why am I feeling this way? So we're judging, so we're so it's like fueling instead of letting the emotion express itself and living it, and perhaps validating it if it is valid, or taking opposite action when it isn't. We're basically just growing that emotion by adding shame to it. And that's one of the hardest things to let go of, because shame is hard. I mean, Brené Brown talks beautifully about it, but that one is a hard one to invite into your house. Back to Rumi's poem.
Mm. Yeah, you make me think. I think part of my experience is that the kind of rational is often considered safer. Has been something I've been taught was allowed. If you can rationally argue for it, you're allowed it. Partly, whereas my experiencing of the world on an emotional level is fundamentally different from a lot of people's, and that means. But the point is, it is subjective, but we're kind of not allowed our own subjectivity, almost our own differences in experiencing, our differences in perspective. And I think I've learned, I've only slowly been reclaiming this trust of that side of me, and the ability to do that, and just to express that. And I think one of the big challenges I've certainly found with this is that when I first started practicing expressing these things, I was really bad at it because I hadn't actually had the opportunity to develop any skill in expressing it. And I think that can almost form a negative feedback loop where we're bad at expressing it, and so we learn it's unsafe, and so we express it less, and then we get worse at expressing it. Whereas actually being able to do so in a space where it's okay, we can build up the ability to express it well. And I don't know about you, but because we both talk on issues like this, I found that some of the best talks I give, when I can include an appropriate degree of the emotion in what I'm conveying to people, that's so much more powerful and so much more effective at getting the message across than kind of just the facts. But it's taken a lot of practice.
There's something that you said that I'm like, we still need to work. Bad. What does it mean to be bad at expressing emotions?
I mean, I think there is the best word to say is unskillful. That's the real, is to be. We can be more or less skillful at expressing ourselves, at making ourselves understood to the other party, using things that convey the level, the appropriateness, the subtlety, the ambiguity. I love that you touched on it. I think it's so important, this idea of just having one emotion. I really do think we should get rid of the emotion wheel. It's more like an emotion sphere, but like maybe even I don't know what the
3D universe of emotions.
4-dimensional equivalent of a sphere is. A hypersphere, I suppose, if a hypercube is anyway. So yes, so this idea that emotions aren't always tinged with, aren't always somewhat ambivalent. It's something we've actually spoken about on the show before. But it's such a complex thing to be able to convey that well, and particularly, I think for some people, if their emotions are allowed by society, if they're deemed appropriate, they get coached and supported in learning to express those. Whereas if we don't get the opportunity, we can be very unskilled in our expression of our emotions and what our needs are, what needs haven't been met, what's happened that's caused that. And that is a skill that we can develop, but it's not something, I think, certainly for me, that was immediate and natural without some practice.
Yeah, I think there's an element of like, yes, upskilling ourselves in recognizing in the internal experience and then expressing the emotions. There's also an element of changing society's expectations of what a presentation of emotion must look like, or what is the idea of like there's a norm or something. I mean, if there is one, then I'm never going to fit in it, for example. Does that mean that the way I express my emotions isn't valid? I personally don't think so. Does it make it effective or not? It helps to have the skills. But yeah, I think
you're right. They're always valid.
From my perspective, we need to focus on both sides.
And
how do we upskill ourselves and people like us who've never had that language and that's those skills perhaps, but also how do we change society so that different expressions of emotions are accepted and acceptable, and a little girl like me who's a ball of emotions is not constantly told you're too much, you're too loud, you're too this, you're too that, and then learns to never show up as anything else but the perfect polished version of whatever it is that is, I think, expected, by making sure that I'm mirroring everybody and I have no idea who I am. Yeah. Does that make sense? I think
Absolutely.
we need to operate on both sides.
No, you're right. You're right. I think it's really important, and that you make such an important point, that emotions are always valid and our expression is always valid. And actually we could do as a society to vastly improve our scope of like how to work with others' emotions. But on the same element, we can also use our own and work with them better. But no, I think you're absolutely right. And the validity of emotions is absolutely, I think that's often where the shame comes from. I think, it's like this idea that and for me, yeah, I really, that idea of not being anchored in your own experience, because for me, the implicit message over and over again was, well, your experience isn't trustworthy. Mm-hmm. We can't, your emotions aren't telling you something. Your emotions you're feeling wrong, essentially. You're doing emotions wrong. Therefore, you can't trust this aspect of yourself.
Mm. I think the validation point is a very interesting one, and that was something really important in the therapy journey as well, in terms of like mostly agreed, like maybe this is a rough figure, this is non-scientific, please don't take it away as science. Let's just say 80% of the time emotion valid, right? And learning to validate that for ourselves and to validate that for others, super important and life-changing. Sometimes the emotion is not valid, but only ourselves can say that for ourselves. So let's give an example. Let's say something happens in my life and I feel really devastated, extremely, extremely sad. Other people might think it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. But for me, the sadness response is like 80 out of 100. The sadness is valid. The level for me is valid. I validate that. It's 80 out of 100. For me, it's devastating. That's how I experience it. Perhaps because of sharing it with someone and their reaction, then suddenly I feel shame because they say, you're overreacting. This is really not a big deal. Is the shame valid? It's not valid. But only I can decide that. The shame is not valid. According to my lived experience of this emotion, of this situation, sadness at 80 out of 100 is granted. And I invite this emotion and I'm gonna give myself the opportunity to cry, to stay in bed for another 2 hours tomorrow because I just need to process this, to let it wash through me and live through me and let it go in some way. And that's an interesting one where it's something I had to learn, because like you, I did not trust my intuition. I did not trust my emotions. I did not trust my lived experience of anything. So when my therapist was like, "Do you think the shame is valid?" I would be like, "Yeah. I mean, they told me that this is, really not a good reaction to have this person. And I like this person. I trust this person. They're my friend and my family, whoever." And it was like a learning to take a step back. And sometimes the shame is valid. I'm not saying that. It was just an example of a situation where it's really like, again, untangling those spaghettis. It's very hard to say, and trying to figure out, but emotion intensity, other emotion, other intensity, over emotion, is it valid, yes or no, in my experience? If it's valid, then how can I let it live and breathe and experience it, and allow myself to experience it and express it to others if I feel the need for connection, not always necessary, and really navigate it. If it's not valid, like let's say the shame is not valid, how do I take opposite action? So for example, if I notice that my anxiety is not valid, because actually what I'm feeling is more excitement. Excitement and anxiety, same biological reaction in the body, exactly the same. The difference is how we label it with our thoughts. Very interesting, right? So if I notice that I'm feeling really, really anxious, actually, I'm about to go on stage. I love going on stage. Matthew knows that. So perhaps I'm feeling more excitement. So I have this opportunity to take opposite action and say, usually with anxiety, I will want to retract and hide away and not do it and not go on stage because it's too scary. Actually, if I reframe this excitement and use opposite action, let's go for it. Let's go on stage with the anxiety and show up and enjoy it. Right? That's an example of problem solving when it's valid and navigating the emotion, accepting it, inviting it, versus opposite action when we say, nah.
And I love that. And I think in my experience, it's also a really good example of being able to cope with the ambivalence. Is, for me, there is a degree of anxiety, an appropriate anxiety that comes with performance. It's what makes me good at performing. I need that drive. If I'm like, I don't do the preparation, I don't have the right energy when I show up. And a couple of times it's happened, and it's actually been a real problem because I just don't put in the performance that I actually like putting in. So I think there's something for me around that you can be excited and anxious, and
Yes.
and be, to have an appropriate degree of, well, I suppose it's appropriate fear to some degree, or appropriate, there's a possibility here that I want to realize and things I have to do, and it informs the action rather than it being like separate. But I think there's something really interesting for me in that idea of shame, and for me there's partly like there's an idea in there of other people, of taking on the emotions that other people think we should be feeling, which is definitely something I learned was what I had to do actually to stay safe very often, and was what was expected of me. And if I didn't do that, I would get in a huge amount of trouble, in various contexts and a lot of life contexts. And that means that there's a weird paradox there in the idea of, okay, we take this, we don't take this set of emotions, the ones that arise from ourselves, at all seriously. Someone else's, we're like, oh yeah, that's nailed on, that's definite. It's like, I think there's something about being discerning, particularly about the internal ones feel like they're always valid, but sometimes it takes a while to sit with understanding them. Like, what is this telling me? Like the anxiety excitement thing. It's like, if I jump to a conclusion about it, like it means I should be afraid and really afraid and not go on, then that's a problem. If it means, okay, this is something I want to do and want to do well, and I can use that energy to do that, that's a different thing. Whereas with emotions that other people are kind of offering us, I think it's perfectly valid to be discerning about whether or not we want to take those on at all. And to be, because I think very often, and particularly as a neurodivergent person, our distress becomes kind of public property. Becomes something that other people want to minimize, not for our well-being, but because they can't handle it. And I mean, you see this in the history of psychiatry, and why the kind of drugs that a lot of people are treated with don't really change the inner experience, but they change the outward expression, which is less distressing for everyone else. And I think that is one of the really, really big challenges that we end up facing, and it can really turn into a very nasty feedback loop as well, because it's then very difficult for us to meet our own needs on an emotional level, because we meet more and more invalidation around that. And for me, unpicking that relationship, being like, actually, no, this is mine, and I'll take that, but the rest of it. And I think the other side of it is it doesn't have to be someone else's either, but we don't have to carry it.
Yeah.
I think that for me was the really big thing, because there was an assumption, there's this kind of weird, I suppose, like zero. It's like, well, okay, there's this thing here. If it isn't mine, then it must be yours, so you have it. Which I think is the assumption why we end up getting so much of it. But actually, it's like, I'm just going to put this down. If you care about it, you can do whatever you like with it. But I'm not carrying it anymore. I'm going to put it down. I think for me, that has been a really, really helped with my ability to discern when other people were offering their own emotions for me to feel.
Yeah, I used to have a really, really hard time with, especially being an emotional sponge. And that's something that I've learned is very common with BPD, and it's really taking on everybody's emotions and being empathetic to the nth degree. And I've often found myself in situations where I have no idea how I'm feeling, and I have no idea if I'm in an interpersonal relationship, what's this person's emotion, what's my own emotion, where do I end, where do I start? There's an element that is linked to mirror neurons, where we are mirroring each other. So we obviously, and then we're constantly exchanging energy. And like I said, energy, emotion, energy in motion, right? We're constantly having that exchange. So I'm going to say it was impossible. I had no idea. It took me so long to start distinguishing, what am I feeling? And sometimes I have to really kind of pause, breathe, and be like, hang on, am I anxious? Am I angry? Or am I just absorbing, this person maybe shouting at me, or, shaking or something, and then, or sadness. Like, I can get extremely depressed, and then I turn around and I'm like, where is that coming from? And like you said before, echoing something you said previously, I can't find anything in the past. I can't find anything in the future. I can't find anything in the present. And I notice, I've been hanging out with this person who is currently feeling really depressed for very, very valid reasons. I've just taken on the emotion. And I find that really hard to process, because when it's not your own as well, but you have taken it on already, when you say just letting it kind of, off your shoulders, that bit I find it so hard. Once it's inside of me, I really need to work through it as if it was my own, even though it didn't come from within.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, similarly, really, I think it's that sitting with it until you're like, oh yeah, that doesn't actually have anything attached to it, but you still have to sit with it. Or certainly for me, I still have to be with it until it's almost like the emotion's like, oh yeah, if we go back to the roomies metaphor, it's like the emotion's like, oh sorry, wrong house,
Yes, that's it.
and then it
But
goes
thank you
next
for the
door.
cookies. Thank you for the tea and the cookies.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. I mean, one thing we didn't touch on, which I really wanted to cover around, negative, the idea of negative emotions, and is back to that notion of energy. They've actually done studies of the energetic value of emotions in the body. And they can identify like the link between like the different like neurotransmitters and emotions is fascinating. Point is, all emotions have a positive energetic charge. None of them have a negative energetic charge. I just found that so incredible. The difference is some of them have a low and some of them have a high energetic charge. So something like anger or excitement will be high energetic charge. It's going to make you be active, want to move. Some of them, like sadness, grief, will have a low energetic charge, and they're going to make you want to kind of step back and quieten your body and your activity and your behavior. I just found that so fascinating, and I'm sure there's more being done, and maybe this is even being challenged as you watch this video. But I was reading about that very recently for an article that I was writing, and it was mind-blowing to me, because I was like, well, we can't talk about negative emotions. That doesn't make any sense then.
Yeah, they're always telling you something, and I think the withdrawal, is quite often, or I feel like a lot of the negative when we talk about what we mean by negative emotions is a funny word, really. It's I guess it's emotions we don't want to feel
Yeah.
on some level, or emotions we're taught aren't helpful, perhaps.
Or also that we're not meant to express outside in
Not
the
allowed
world,
to express. Yeah, that's a very good,
allowed
yes.
or meant to. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's got many different layers. But yeah, I just want to unpack that, because I think, or drop it, or burn it in the spirit of anger. Um, if you've watched Inside Out, you know what I mean. The little anger character in her head has fire on his. That's what I was picturing. Tangent. I lost my thoughts now. It was gonna happen. 10 minutes to spare hadn't happened yet, so bring me back on track. Back to
Well,
you.
I mean, yeah, that was pretty good going. I'm surprised we haven't lost the threads earlier. um,
So
so
true.
yeah, no, it's
Oh yeah, I know. Positive, what we label as positive emotions, hey? Like obviously joy, amazing, happiness, amazing. We all want to be all of that all the time. There are entire books, there are entire industries built on like being happy all the time. Which by the way is totally unrealistic. Unless maybe you're an AI robot. I mean, good on you. Like I'd love to meet you one day in the metaverse. Anyway, another tangent. Back to the point. Hope. Hope is often labeled as, say, positive emotion. And so I never understood the journey that you can go on with hope. And that again was like mind boggling, because hope will basically bring you up in when you're experiencing hope. And then what happens after depends on the outcome. Does what you hope happen, or does it not happen? And the come down from hope not happening, aka disappointment slash sadness slash grief slash anger slash whatever might be happening, guilt, shame, etc., that was so hard for me to experience, because I get my hopes up all the time. I mean, probably also linked to the ADHD of like overexcitement about so many different, this project is going to be amazing, this thing is going to be the next best thing, oh my god, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And so when things don't go the way that I'm hoping, coping with that curve was so hard, until again it's, and maybe we're moving into a little bit of the practical tips, like being able to name emotions, being able to describe what is going on inside, either to someone else or even just to yourself. having those tools without judgment. It's not to say I should feel this, I shouldn't feel that. It's literally just to say, this is what I'm feeling, this is what's going on, and observing, noticing. That is so powerful. It sounds so simple. You're Solène, really? That's it. It is the turning point. And often we're looking for magic pills or complex solutions, but actually there's a lot to say about something that is hard to do, but simple in the principle of, noticing, naming, describing.
Yeah, I know there's a big practice there for me. I think for me, free writing really helped, really
Yes.
helps because I am quite verbal. But the other thing is a lot of somatic things work, like movement. For me, particularly movement to music, it's a really helpful way of connecting with that stuff, because it is a practice, and it's like, and I think when it's particularly with where there is some emotion from something else like music, and I really connect with. I mean, I have strong emotional reactions to movies, music, everything. I'm like, so it's one of the consequences of being this way. I think for a lot of people who similarly, it's just like, which can be quite awkward sometimes. But yeah, I was watching a cheesy Disney movie the other day and just like crying at the end. So yes, it's just like,
Of course.
of course, exactly. But I think there's something um, really helpful in being able to be in that kind of these states and be able to feel into them and have all that, this almost like the external support around them, experiencing. It's like practice being with them, and okay, yes, it has kind of come from outside, but it's chimed with something in me, and what's that? But being really aware, without, like you say, judging and controlling it. That's the practice, the allowing it to emerge. I think there's definitely something in this, that you mentioned, this feeling like you're too much, being given the message that you're too much. And that's definitely been a thing for me, and how much I think fear that generates in other people, and just internalizing a lot of that fear, because I also take on other people's feelings. So it's like, so you end up, if your behavior induces something in someone else, even if that feeling isn't that helpful or appropriate, you're likely to take that on and believe that is true. And for me, like the physical experiencing is really helpful for being with the things and unpicking the things, for sure.
Definitely. Music is such an important one that you brought up. It's really interesting. We've actually just done an episode on BPD and music. We process music in our brain differently, and it can really validate our emotional experience. And also, we can use music to get out of an emotional rumination, because sometimes if we're not letting the emotion come but also allowing it to go, we can end up in like a rumination cycle where we're just like stuck in anger or stuck in shame or stuck in sadness. Or so it's quite interesting how we can use music, like watching a Disney movie or listening to a silly song, to kind of get ourselves out of, in a gentle way. But it's always back to mindfulness for me. It's like using mindfulness, can be in the form of a meditation, can be in the form of a creative endeavor, whatever it is that rocks your boat. But just to connect and to be aware of what am I experiencing, what might I need in the moment, etc. And the other couple of things I wanted to mention, one is around compassion, showing ourselves compassion with whatever it is that we're going through. When I am not compassionate and very judgmental, I listen back to the music topic, to the song Human by Rag and Bone. And that is a reminder of I'm only human after all. So that helps with that. And then connection is the other important thing. Emotions really help us connect with each other. Yes, they're obviously internal messages and all the things we've covered. We've also haven't covered so much, like when we do express emotions, like you said, effectively and skillfully, we can truly connect with each other. Like, us sitting there and maybe sharing a moment of grief or a moment of joy, and really being like going through it together at the same time. It brings us so much closer than talking about the weather or, some facts about whoever cares,
I think this is the thing. Like, I don't know about you, but a lot of people who have this experience is that they'll find, and I find that people will tell me a huge amount of their life story, just like on the bus or something. There's just something about being more open to feeling that makes other people feel comfortable connecting and sharing, which is a huge gift to the world, actually. I think this idea that if we're given to feeling very acutely, that it's a problem or a burden to ourselves and to others, which is very often what was the message I picked up growing up, is that actually it can be a huge gift as well. And I think with practice, it doesn't come like a lot of neurodivergent things. It doesn't necessarily come pre-packaged, ready-made.
That would be so nice. Here is your user manual.
Yeah,
Here's how
exactly.
to navigate this gift.
But
But
with
I
some
agree.
luck and some care, it can be really good too,
Yes.
as well as being really difficult sometimes.
Yes. But like echoing this, I wouldn't have it any other way. Like I have wished for it to be different before, but now having more skills and having done a lot more of my own research and develop, own growth around this topic, the fact that, like you say, people might feel more comfortable, more welcome to share some of these things. The fact that I can really like feel and connect on that really deep level with people and with even stories and fiction and nonfiction. I'm so grateful for that. It makes my life so intensely colorful. And yeah, that's really amazing. And I know we're very soon running out of time, but one thing we didn't touch on, which maybe is for another time, is sometimes the experience gets too much and so much that we can experience dissociation and potentially that feeling the opposite way of emptiness. And that's something that happens a lot with BPD, and I know with also other neurodiversity experiences, is that sometimes we don't feel anything at all. We're so numb, we feel empty, and it is often a protective mechanism because a lot of the time we feel so much. Suddenly, perhaps in this moment, it's just too much, we can't handle it, whatever is happening, the body, the mind creates that kind of dissociation and we feel nothing at all. And that is also really hard to navigate. So for anyone who is finding themselves in that experience and thinking they've talked about emotions for so long, but I can't feel anything, I get that too. It wasn't until I jumped off a plane in New Zealand that at one point in my life I hadn't felt for weeks. And then I jumped off the plane with a parachute. And I felt alive again. And that's, yeah, I think that's also a very hard thing to go through when you're so detached. And it's like a protective reaction, but it's like not
I
always.
think like a lot of protective reactions, it's absolutely appropriate and really helpful in the moment, and it helps us get through. If I hadn't dissociated, I don't know what would, like, for some chunks of my life, I don't know if I'd be here right now.
That's one.
But equally, some of these things stop serving us after a
Exactly.
time. And I think, if it becomes a question of whether you want to, and whether you would enjoy feeling with, it's absolutely fine to know that and not to engage with that. I think as well, if you don't feel equipped and you don't feel ready, you don't have to. There's no obligation in any of this. But you're right, and I think the idea of it's the most common coping mechanism to
Yeah.
this, that we separate and we kind of step back. And I think it's interesting with the mindfulness. I do wonder with some of the stepping back, because I've had quite a lot of practice of some of the elements of mindfulness, quite a lot. So some of it came quite naturally, some of it was quite difficult, but some of it was kind of aspects of things that I was already doing. And I think we're probably closer to resolving this than we think, even if we are regularly like really struggling or dissociating. The thing itself isn't a problem. It is addressable. It is something we can work with if we want to. I think that's the really big message for me.
Yeah. And it's validating that it's okay to dissociate and it's okay to feel empty sometimes. So it's validating both feeling a lot and sometimes feeling nothing
Feeling
at
nothing.
all.
Completely.
Both experiences are 100% valid. So I think three kind of main takeaways of, things to maybe implement or think about is naming emotions, validating emotions, aka refraining from judgment, no shoots. And three is regulating emotions. And that's back to the writing, the music, maybe physical exercise, compassion, connection, all these things. So naming, validating, regulating, I think that would be the three things that I would kind of want to share.
Absolutely. Super. I think that's a really lovely way to wrap everything up. So if people want to get in touch with you, we've got quite a lot of different things that they can do. We've got your
ADHD.
Well, yeah, the Be Beyond Borders website on LinkedIn. Sorry, a website, also LinkedIn, also Be Beyond Borders on Instagram and YouTube, and the BPD Bunch. So, do you want to say anything in particular about any of those, or?
Just that it's open door. So yes, if you have some thoughts, reactions, questions, feel free to reach out on any of the platforms that suits you best. I forgot to mention, my own talk show called The Inclusion Conversation. There's a whole bunch of videos on YouTube around lots of topics linked to diversity and inclusion, as well as disability, neurodiversity more recently as well. So if that's of interest to continue kind of those conversations and learning, please feel free to check those out. But yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I said I was unprepared, but you see, we ran out of time and we still have things to talk about anyway. So maybe it's for the best.
I knew there was going to be more material. I mean, I've been on the inclusion conversation, and we've got the group one coming up as well, which is very exciting. So
yes,
yeah, so do check that out.
November, check it out.
Yeah.
We have a wrap up of the year with all the different speakers, guests from this year coming and sharing their reflections. And it's always very interactive. So it's also in a place for, anyone attending to reflect themselves as well on their own year and what's happened and the change.
Absolutely. No, that's great. Thank you so much. So, I really hope that got everyone in the audience thinking. So please do reach out and get in touch and check out all of Solène's stuff. If this episode was useful to you, please do share it with someone else you think would also find it useful, because that's the best way. And you can do that. You can also do that by commenting and engaging, or just by directly sharing it. So yeah, I'm a bit behind on the past episodes at matthewbowringer.com, but you can catch all the past episodes on YouTube and LinkedIn as well, and the upcoming episodes will be there as soon as I get around to sorting them all out. And the next episode is going to be, we're going to take a quick break. We did have one scheduled, but that's going to be postponed. So in the next episode, it's going to be in a little bit, in about 4 weeks' time, and I'm going to be talking to Ade Adeniji, who is a facilitator, consultant, and coach, particularly with an interest in diversity and inclusion. We're going to be talking about the assumption, don't look back. Now, I think really, I do love how these kind of weirdly weave together without any intention, like any conscious intent on my part.
My brain was like, in anger, don't look back, in anger.
Well, exactly.
It's the song, right?
Exactly. But it's so easy to kind of get stuck in the past, but it's also really can be really useful to revisit our past experiences sometimes,
100%.
and it can inform our future and change our future, and to heal when things in the past have been difficult. So I think it's a really interesting one to explore. So and will probably be a continuation of some of the themes we've spoken about today as well. That's at 1 p.m. UK time on Wednesday, the 6th of December. So I very much hope to see you then. But in the meantime, please do go out there and make some delightful dissent of your own. Thanks and goodbye.
Thank you.